right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It's a little tight, and we have a classroom and then in the next room, and if we open up the walls, so I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what we're going to do. First off, I just want to thank you for coming. This is our first reading of the, at least the new year for the Celebration of Literary Arts, and I'll be introducing Tracy here in a little bit. And then she'll read to us and kind of chat with us about her work, and then we'll open up the Q&A. So if you're thinking about questions, Tracy can field anything about writing or process or poetry or beyond, right? So, and then we'll have a book signing at the end. So as advertised, we have, so Tracy, we gave her like the option, like we can pay you money or we can buy a bunch of your books and give to our students for free. And of course she's like, give the kids books. And so free books are coming to you. So if you have an inclination, you can come and grab a book after the reading and she'd be happy to sign it for you. Right? And you can chat with her a little bit one-on-one if you'd like. Right? So we'll try to have time for that at the end so you're not rushed through the whole class. All right, also, I want to mention that we have, out in the hall, we have free copies of Expressions. It's our student literary magazine, so grab a copy on your way out. We also have a creative writing contest that is happening this spring, so there's a flyer there with information about that. It's sponsored by Beaver Dell Books, which is also where Tracy will be reading tonight at 6:30. So if you want an encore performance, you can come to tonight and listen to it there. All right, also we have free buttons. Our librarian, she gets very excited about the buttons. So we have some cool book buttons, I guess you can call it. Get excited to use that machine. Okay, so I'll just start off by saying today we are lucky to be hosting Tracy Brimhall, who is a professor of creative writing and narrative medicine at Kansas State University, as well as the author of 5 poetry collections, including Love Prodigal, which is the book that's on sale, but free today. Her poems and essays have appeared in publications such as The New Yorker, The Nation, The New York Times Magazine, Best in American Poetry. She's received national fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Park Service, the Academy of American Poets, and she is the current poet laureate of the state of Kansas. So, just a small story. Last spring, I went to one of Tracy's teaching sessions at Des Moines Poetry Palooza, which happens every spring. She was one of the headliners. And she talked about the craft of poetry, of course. But she also mentioned how much she enjoyed famous quotes, and I do too. So in turn, as she spoke, I dutifully wrote down all the insights that she made, making note of her quotes. Except by the end of the hour, I had like 5 pages filled with quotes, basically transcribing her entire lecture like a court reporter. In other words, Tracy says, everything Tracy says is like super noteworthy and super quotable. So if you're taking notes today, pace yourself. Maybe I'll just mention what I love about her work, which is not only the beautiful writing, but also how it's way more interested in the messiness of life rather than any simple insight. And how in her newest book, though she often uses the image of the phoenix rising from the ashes, she also questions the cost that comes with such resurrection and the pain that arrives. Also, she does so much research. I walk away from every Tracy Brimhall poem with a little bit of a fact, a little bit of trivia, whether it's about how certain words originated in America or unique facts about wildlife and history. So as I wrote this introduction, I was looking for a quote, but again, I had like 5 pages of quotes from her interviews. So I'll just end with this. Tracy says, the goal of writing isn't great poems. The goal of writing is to be alive, to get your mind on paper, to remind yourself of who you are or were or are trying to become, to create a map that names the parts of your own landscape so as to help find your way out of the labyrinth. I just try to have one-night stands with my darkness, while also thinking about it as an act of love to whoever reads it, which they includes us. So, let's welcome Tracy Brimhall.
Also, that's such like a love letter to my teaching, which I so appreciate, that you wrote down things that I talked about in my session last year at Poetry Palooza. And so I'm going to start actually with a piece of advice you did not ask for. But speaking of like loving quotes and loving words, I think a lot of people write on computers these days. And we were talking, the students who hung out with me before this, we were talking about writing in our journals and whether or not we write poems in our journals or type. And we did a book arts project where we made these tiny books we can keep in our pockets to write. You can write poems on computers or your short stories or your memoirs. But one thing I always do, if you do like a journal, the thing I always do with a journal is I start by hand copying some of my favorite quotes about writing or about life, because then I feel like it doesn't matter what I write down, I've already put great writing into the journal, and I call it blessing the book by writing down my favorite things. My kiddos and I also keep a family comfort book where we write down whenever we have like a quote that we like or we read something in a book. We read together every night from 8 to 9. And if we read something we love, we put it in the family comfort book so that if we're ever down or however we're feeling, we have this like long record of things that we have read and things that we have loved together as a family. And so you don't have to take any of that advice, but it's really working for me. I really love keeping all sorts of quotes about poems handy, and by rewriting them every single time I start a new journal, I reconnect with the things that I love and the reasons I write. And also I can quote quotes about writing pretty easily because I rewrite them every single time I start a new journal. Some of you may already have a copy of the book. I think I saw a box over there, so everybody will have a free copy if they want a free copy. The book is called Love Prodigal, which came from a poem I'm going to read first here. But the idea of prodigal for me came from Bible stories growing up of the prodigal son who was being a teenager and like, nah, I'm not listening to you. I'm going off and doing my own thing. Came back after doing some naughty stuff. And his dad was like, oh, it's so good to have you home. So for me, that idea of being a prodigal at something is maybe I've made some mistakes, but still being welcomed back to that thing with open arms. And the thing I've wanted most of my life to be good at is love. Obviously, I'm a human being out here making some mistakes in it. But the idea of loving and being welcomed back after making mistakes into by the same love or by a new love, that it's okay to love and to err in that way and to still be taken back. Love prodigal. I make love when I am bored. That's how I know I am an intelligent animal. It is easy to tremble, a pistol brushed with a bumblebee's fur, and who doesn't want to be golden? Like pearls of fat glistening in an artery or a mother's first milk. I want to send you photos of dead fledglings on the sidewalk, those perils of the lavish season. But we are wrong. A news story tells me so, explaining that it's beauty that drives evolution, not a mate with an advantageous beak. I would tell you this, but letters and novels keep seducing me with their fantasies of closure, and I like the way your silence wastes inside me. I am a grieving animal. Let's not pretend that souls are beautiful. They're as ugly as white petals wilting, crisping and curling in on themselves in cloudy water and green rot. But let them fall into me like loose changed into a leg cast. What's broken cannot be healed with anything but superglue and imagination. Still, let it be tended to. Let it be tender. Let's imagine a miracle together at a distance, the reunion of a pronoun and its first verb. I am not over it. The elk's blood blackens the bottom of the fridge, and when I wipe it, it leaves a pink quarter, a blood ghost, a hunger stain in the shape of your birthmark. I am a regretful animal. My heart tries to grow as fast as velvet in May. It's trying to attract an ending with a crown of daisies, an archive of spring, of wants, of waterfalls, of woods. Good God, I know you won't take me back. Thank you. That's my one clap. I like it. And you don't have to clap. I just liked that we just had one clap. So as Mark mentioned in the introduction, I was really obsessed with the idea of the phoenix because, middle-aged, I've had to start over a few times in my life. And I really hate the phoenix because to me, it makes the idea of starting over and self-resurrection seem like it's easy to do. But actually, I think it always has a cost. It's always a little bit harder for me. Every time there's a new grief, all the old ghosts come out. It's never been simple of like, dust myself off, boom, check out my feathers again. It's always been like, really hard to face big losses and then get started again. And so I don't know how to transition to this more naturally. So the one thing in this poem, because I do love a fact, I love to research. Most of what I know about this life is not like my high school math class or the class I took in college about astronomy. It's because I Googled. And then I dug around for a while and I got lost in the rabbit hole and enjoyed staying curious and learning. But one of my favorite stories from Greek mythology, which I think came before college, but it was before the Rick Riordan Revolution. I learned all of my myth the more boring way. But I always love the story of Psyche, who was secretly married to Cupid and didn't know it. And her sister was like, girl, I bet he's real uggo. Like, he's a 2 out of 10. He's not cute. And so then she foolishly should have trusted the man, lights a candle, is so taken aback by how beautiful her husband is that she drips wax on him and burns him. So the line about Psyche being careless with candles is all about don't drip hot wax on your boo. If people still say boo, I don't know what we say anymore. This poem is called Why I Stayed. Because the mirror rose over the night garden, melancholy in bronze. Because I greeted the moon wearing eyeshadow green as a scarab and nothing else. Because, like Artemis, I fed a man to his hounds. Because all summer I wanted to die, but chose not to trust my feelings. Instead, I took 99 of the peacock's eyes, half the checking account, and left. Because I watched spokes of light sow my animus into a flock of shadows. Because when I cataloged my gratitudes, I listed high thread counts, gin and tonics, bedrooms with skylights, jeans on sale, and how good my ass looked in them. Because cabbage white butterflies in the buttercups and sea salted caramels never failed to gladden me. Because I hoped to die painlessly like a star. Because young sheep needed their necks tarred to ward off the foxes and the crows. Because, like Psyche, I was careless with candles. Because joy returned with a kiss crisp as a dried bee that became a stab of honey on my tongue. Because I wanted to love someone who wouldn't count my sobs as proof. Because I found 1,000 small pleasures that made me want to live, and they were bridges, birdsong, strawberries, sunlight, and lambs. In that poem, I said, like counting my gratitudes. In one of the worst years of my life, I was told to keep a gratitude journal. And it's like, game on. I'm gonna do 100 days, 10 gratitudes a day. That's 1,000 gratitudes. Because gratitude should be a challenge, I guess. It should be like, I'm gonna go hard. But it actually was really useful to me. I found the first 3 came pretty easy. It was pretty easy to be like, the weather was nice, I'm not sick, right? Like whatever, the first gratitudes were quick, but the more I had to dig, the more I was like, I really loved the way the light hit that flower and I watched it for a minute. Like I really liked those jeans I found. It became easier the more I did, if I set a goal of more gratitudes, I found more interesting things to be happy about. But that quick, easy, I'm not dead. So sometimes those first few gratitudes was like, okay, well, it was 72 today and that was nice. Sometimes the first gratitudes are just throat clearing and you find more interesting things the more you go. Not that anybody needs to do 1,000 gratitudes, but I found it useful. So one fun fact, my little teacher moment. Songwriters really love to sue you. So you can't use song lyrics in poems, but you can use titles. Titles of songs are all fair use. So if you think that there's a really good song title out there, you can title your poem that, or you can slip it in a poem. But otherwise, you're limited to, I think it's 6 words of a song lyric, but otherwise you can't do more than that or you get sued. So I'm a different generation, but if you have any Gen X friends or Gen X parents, or you know this song by Meatloaf, you know how it ends. But the title is the same as the title for the song. I would do anything for love, but I won't. Does anybody know the real ending of? Oh gosh, y'all are so educated. Get it, DMACC. You're educating these kids. So I use the title as a run-in to the poem. Meatloaf taught me a lot about love and mystery and operatic pop music, and so it stayed with me from childhood, and I just reused that idea of what would you do for love and what wouldn't you do. I would do anything for love, but I won't cook lobster. They're loyal sea rubies and deserve better than a pinch of lemon and herbed butter. But I'll shower hot enough to brighten you, make zinnias of your shoulder and steal the towels when it's over. Your water tattooed back, a garden before it fades. I won't shave anything unless I feel like it, but I'll wax whatever part of your body you request. I'm not an empath, so I won't cry when I do it. I'll let your pain be yours. I won't give up coffee or pistachios or my dog. I know you wouldn't ask, but I like to be upfront about my boundaries. I bark mine like a seagull, touching my books, my mother's china, my chest, but you're fine with kindness. You wait for me to feel safe. I will always let you tease me about talking to my plants when I water them, if you let me tease the way your hips go stiff when we salsa. But even then, I won't plan another trip to Rome with you. Not this year, anyway. Not after we've given back the tickets and calendars, dinners and sunburns we thought were waiting. Instead, let's accept the mail-order lemon trees. Let's accept repeating puzzles we've already finished. Try the Paloma recipe again. Let's accept it's not what we would do for each other, but what we can do. And I can feed the sourdough starter we named Gizmo. You can return my bowl when you've washed it. But I won't let you say that Pluto is not a planet. I miss the solar system's symmetry. I won't agree that ghosts aren't real, even if you're right. I like a dose of fear. I like whispering back to the knocks on the wall. I won't release balloons when you die because I love sea turtles almost as much as you. Maybe it's a tie. I won't kiss anyone after you die for at least 60 days and probably longer, but if I meet someone who smells like you, I might invite them into the rain and keep my eyes closed. We can disagree about the shower curtain, can have days without texts. I can chide you about the state of your tomatoes, and you can correct the way I say trilobite. Trilobite? And the only time I'll run is across the gymnasium in a pink dress, and the only time I'll give up is when we play hearts and I count the cards, and I know your hand, and no, trust me, this time I can do it. I can give you everything, even if it means losing. I will. I want to. Let me help you shoot the moon. I also think one of the top secret things about a life in writing and how to stay writing for a lifetime, not just a class, is to have really good friends. Some of my classes set up Discord chat servers with each other. Some of them find other ways to stay in touch where they end up moving. My best friend from college, we've been traveling to hang out with each other and write together for 20 years. And so we write together every day we're together. And this poem came from, she said, use another form of writing. And then we talked about the books we were reading, and I was reading The Philosophy of Love. And I had to use certain words from it, but it's an admission essay, so I'm applying to Love U, like Love University, but it's really funny. But because, again, the thing I want most to do in my life is to love well. It's my number one goal, and it's not a thing I can ever be perfect at, but it's my favorite thing to strive for. And so this is my admissions essay, applying to Love U. I am a good student. Voted most likely to try harder, not voted most likely for fairy tales, though I have been both hooded and wolfed. My honors thesis on the role of motherlessness and love hunger brought the candied house down. I could have been valedictorian if the metrics for success were ardor and potential for transformation. I can recognize the chemical structure of serotonin and how to calculate my best chance for a free drink from across the room, and both have strong angles. I know how it feels when that hormone unlatches my ribs, silks my legs. I don't confuse that with love, because in each unit of intimacy, I enter slow. adjust my breath, recognize when the accusations are confessions. I excelled in the serious ethics of kissing, how it makes the body more image than idea. But I admit that sometimes I like to lick mezcal and grapefruit from a hero's morally ambiguous mouth. I'm sorry. That's how I know I'm a successful candidate. The temptations, the failures, the ever-afters of forgiveness that I have already lived. For so long, I offered others the love I wanted to receive, the cursive letters and lost slippers, the balanced equations and checkbooks, years of service in the scales of care. Change my story, accept me. So friends, right, community I think is one of the key biggest things about what makes a life in writing more successful. The people who want to see your new work, chat to you about your new work, do things with you, invite you places. And I think community is the key to keep writing, right? Who give you ideas of like, here, use this to write your next poem. And I think that's one of the biggest secrets of success. But we were also talking about where poems come from or our literary inheritances before this. And I was saying that I grew up with very few books in the house, and did not go to the library. I do not come from a family of readers. Nobody in my life reads a book in a given year. But I did have the Bible and comic books growing up. And so I had X-Men and I had Samson. And so a lot of Bible still shows up in my work, and a lot of the names of X-Men actually taught me a lot about vocabulary. And so things can come from a variety of sources of inspiration. That prompt from a friend, song lyrics from the 80s. And this last one, I got the fact about pharaohs and underwear, you'll learn, from a podcast I was listening to as I was driving. So there's no wrong way to get inspiration. Car commercials have given me ideas. There's so many different places to draw different types of inspiration, and there's not a right one or wrong one. So I started my conversation with some students before this talking about death. I'm a real fun person. So I'm going to end with this poem that's called Will and Testament. And I think I'll be quiet now. Will and Testament. Before I let go, let me be awake for midnight again. The new moon and I both comfortable in our tenure with darkness. Before it's over, I want to testify about your untrustworthy mouth, how it rushes off my breast too fast, my pleasure under threat. If I get to choose an afterlife, I'd pick the one with never-ending snow for what it does to the silence, how it makes it easier to hear God listening. Before these years with you, my words were pregnant with an ugly sadness. Now I want a house of nights, of dialogues with owls, of homemade peanut butter ice cream and my ankle on yours. Now that there's this fire, the river. Now that my body has warned us of its limits, the plan. Now with this love, I want to answer the Valentine ringing in the bottle. I want to drop the clock from a hot air balloon before my body ends up in a cadaver lab or a carnival ride. We celebrate my birthday by moving our rings to our right hands to make a happier future possible. I ask how long you will wait after I die to move on. You promise to entomb me like a pharaoh with a chariot and 50 pairs of underwear. Resurrection has practical concerns. Bury me with one of your shirts in case I come back as a bloodhound. Save my favorite panties, the pink ones, for a sexier immortality or a lonely evening. I would return to you as any star. Stay awake, be ready, I'm already burning.
Q&A time.
Yeah, so what questions can I try and sprinkle in, thoughts and advice you didn't ask for in between things. Yeah.
So why creative writing? Like you mentioned that you grew up in a family with not a lot of books. Like what drove you to do creative writing?
I always liked all arts. I really wished I was a dancer, but I'm like 5'2" and too curvy for ballet. And I also really wanted to be a painter, but I we didn't have the funds for how expensive it is to paint, actually. And so one of the things I love about writing and poetry in particular is that it's such a democratic art form. You need a pencil and a piece of paper, and that's pretty cheap these days. And so I was always able to like fold over pieces of paper, and I wrote lots of books about animals as a kid. A typewriter was like my 12th birthday present. I was really excited. And so like it was just, always accessible to me in a way that a lot of other art forms weren't accessible to me, where it feels like you need special knowledge or, special equipment to do. Whereas writing just always felt very accessible. I did do other things. I've had other jobs. I've worked in theaters and corporate and restaurants and all sorts of things. But one thing that I kept going back to poetry for was that felt like I was sleepwalking through my life and checking the boxes or living the life I felt like the world told me I should be living. But my heart wasn't very awake in it. And I think when I write and pay attention to the world, it keeps my soul sitting straight up in my body. And I feel like otherwise I kind of go to sleep inside my own life. And I love a to-do list, but I also don't want my life to be a to-do list. I want to be paying attention to myself and the world and the people that I love. Thank you.
Well, you're a poet laureate.
Yes.
For those in the room who don't know what that is, what is that, and what does it require?
Yeah, so it's a very fancy title that goes back to the Greeks. I love the Greeks, and love sharing Rick Riordan with my kid. But it always was something that was given to both poets and warriors, and I love that those two things are tied together. Actually, the Olympics started as funeral games, anyway. But laureateship now. It was sort of resurrected as a term, and court poets in Europe started to be given that title. There are poet laureates in other countries, but we have it in the United States. There's a national one. Her name's Ada Limon, and she does projects to bring poetry to places. She brought poetry to national parks, like there are park benches in some national parks that have poems on them. And she also wrote a poem for NASA that's on the side of the rocket going to Saturn right now. So she just has all of these ways of bringing poetry to communities. And then not all states, but most do have a poet laureate for the state. Some cities also have them. But the idea is that you are an arts ambassador for that art. So I, in my state, travel the state doing poetry programs with people in public schools, in libraries, and community centers. And it's always a different term. Every state, like Texas, is just 1 year. Kansas does a 4-year term. So I like to say I'm the governor of poetry. Though I can't fix a road or make a policy, I can just go to libraries and read poems and share poems with people. So it's just like public arts activism, like trying to get poems on murals, trying to get poems into schools, trying to talk to people about poems, and some people have written their first poems with me, which is really exciting. And so it's a public arts role where I get to bring poetry to people, encourage them to write it, and to think about the days, the moments in their days that are kind of like living poems, and how they could maybe put that on paper. So mine is a 4-year term. Most of my work in Kansas has to do with uniting food and poems. And I do work with food fundraisers, and I'm doing a poetry cookbook in my state. But trying to find ways to, bring poetry to more people, get people to read one on a day they might not otherwise, and do things to promote the things I care about in my state, which is actually pretty rad. Every state or city that has one has different requirements. I have to do 12 events a year for my state, though I usually do more. And also there's a program in high schools, which I don't know if any of you all participated in, or if anybody has high schoolers, that's called Poetry Out Loud. It's a nationwide contest for high schoolers to be reciting poems, and the winners of their states get to go to DC and compete on the national level. And so I always participate in that program too. So there's certainly one in Iowa, and there's probably something happening in this area, in this district. If you have any high schoolers or know a high schooler that you want to lead them to that, it's cool. They memorize and recite poems and compete on performing poetry. I saw your hand. Do you remember it?
So do you pay attention to specific flower meanings and like flower language in your poems, and what's your favorite flower?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. Okay, I'm obsessed with this because one of the things I give my students is one of the days at the beginning of Intro to Poetry, everybody is given a flower or its meaning, and they have to walk around and figure out what is the, and I always pick the trickiest ones too. And they have to figure out what is what, because if your love poem is handing somebody marigolds, you just told them they were gonna die or that you wish they're gonna die, right? So like, you can't just willy-nilly just be using, you know, a flower that you don't know anything about. Because like in Victorian times, people would use like bouquets to send secret messages. They were like the emojis of their time, but like, it was, that flower was like a real peach one, you know, like that you were sending other messages. It wasn't just that color is pretty. Each flower had a specific meaning. So if it's like foxglove, those are so pretty. You're trying to poison someone. That's a poisonous flower, right? You need to know what your flowers mean and what they're doing or what their uses are, because it can radiate additional meaning out in the poem. So we do that activity in class, and I'm such a basic bee because the dandelion is it for me. I love dandelions. I don't think they're a waste. Every part of them is useful, edible, can be made into medicine. We make dandelion syrup, which I make a little bee's knees. I have not had dandelion, yes, but dandelion wine, for sure. I also love just how much they transform. They're this tight little like, you can't look at me, and then like, wow. And then it turns into like the white fluffy seeds, and all iterations are totally stunning and beautiful. There's some of the best, you know, like pollinators in like strange places for bees. They were brought here as a crop, and now we're like, ew, you're a weed. And the name means tooth of the lion. So rad, you guys. So that is, I know dandelions are not an exciting flower, but the dandelion is just, it's it for me. I love the dandelion. She's so much, all the time. She's just the best. Yeah.
So I'm sure that your poetry or your position at Kansas University has taken you to like different places on the map and to different events. Like, can you go through some of the places that you've traveled to for these events and what your favorite event was or is?
Gosh, I always say I'll go anywhere for a free dinner. But I think my favorite thing about an event, which was my favorite thing about being named laureate, was I have a really strong introvert side, but I love talking to people. I love getting to know people. I can monologue too much, but I really do mean to ask more questions. But like, I feel like connecting with other people is always my favorite thing. So when I get to have interesting conversations, when I get to have conversations with people I otherwise would never have met, I'm always like, wow, this is such a cool moment. Like, this was made possible by poetry, and that's always one of my favorite things, is to realize I'm meeting this person or we're having this interesting conversation because poetry brought us together. So I think, but I also don't have like a favorite person I've met or like, but I love when I feel like I'm genuinely connecting with people. That's always my favorite part. That's the most satisfying thing to me. Also free dinners. I love to eat. I love food so much. But I've been, I mean, like with the laureateship, what's interesting about that is people invited me to spaces that also wouldn't have otherwise. So there's like being a poet in the world, I get invites to certain things, but being a poet laureate, people who otherwise would never have asked me to come to their library or their community were like, oh, will you come down here for this thing that we're doing? And I was like, sure, let's go. Because I'm very experience motivated, and anything I've never done before is something I want to do. One thing that's coming up that I'm really looking forward to is I was invited to the Cork International Poetry Festival in Ireland. All because somebody who liked my work said, you know who you should read to this person in Ireland? And they're like, great, do you want to come to Ireland? I was like, yeah, for sure. But I think that's also a message about that community stuff again, because she and I aren't rubbing elbows and doing each other like secret favors, or, I mean, it's just, I've read for her school once and she likes my work and she recommended it. And so like when you're connected with people who also speak your name in other rooms, not just trash you, but to say like, oh my God, you know who's great? Like that is a thing I found in poetry as a community that I think is really beautiful. And like, I mean, I didn't knock on that door. I didn't ask for that. That just came to me because somebody said my name to somebody else in a kind way. And so I wrote that person an email. I was like, thanks. That was really nice. I really appreciate that. And so like, it's really nice when also you connect with people or find people who want to bring out the best in your art, want to do kind things for you, and who are out there speaking your name to create opportunities, not to knock you down. And I think not every poet can that be true about, surely, but usually it's such a generous community, and it's a community I really like being a part of. One hand and then the second one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember reading Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own
Mm-hmm.
a long time ago when I was an undergraduate, I think. Have you read that one?
Mm-hmm.
So I just, I'm trying to remember, but in essence, she said, you know, you have to have time, money, resources, and preferably a nice spacious room of your own and a writing desk and all that to succeed in literature or make it to the big time or in the academy. So I guess this is a comment. I appreciated when you said earlier that writing is like a cheap way to you know, get your art out into the world. Like musicians can write songs, but they have to have an instrument, so that costs money, and painting is expensive. So just the fact that, and there's countless examples of writers throughout history that have succeeded and not been well-to-do or died and then became famous. But just wondering if you had any thoughts on her supposition, or I think what you said. I don't know. I'm ambivalent about what you said. Or you can succeed in the arts or writing at least, and you don't have to have that much. Just doesn't hurt, but have money and resources.
Yeah, and I think like also people can be poor and still be like make it as musicians, and people can like. But I also felt very ashamed growing up about asking for anything that cost money. And my brother actually is a working musician, and maybe if I just asked like he did, I could have had more support. But I also think you can be scrappy in any discipline, I think, and make it. But I wish we did have more structural support for the arts. I wish the arts stayed in schools and that we weren't quick to cut those programs. I wish that we had more fundings for artists to support them while they're working on their music and their writing and their art. And I wish we had more structural support. And so in that way, I'm like, yeah, Virginia Woolf, you need time, money, you need that space, you need that, all of that stuff. But also, I know that people make it without it. I know people can make it raising 6 kids, writing on the backs of envelopes and getting it done, right? Like, I know you can be scrappy and do more, but I wish culturally we had more of a value in the arts and did more to support those core values of time, money, energy, and space. Had studio spaces for people, had, you know, art spaces in public that were in part of art centers where people could learn or work with others, or I wish more of that existed. That was a value and shared. But also, hell yeah, you can fight to put your heart on the canvas, in the song, on the page, no matter what the economic circumstances or the cultural circumstances. But it would be really nice if like we had more cultural value and financial support for the arts, for sure. Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned about like having those friends to help support you, read each other's writings, etc. Do you have any advice to like help provide that support for your friends, both from a like practical and emotional side of reading the writing and saying more than just, oh, this is good?
Yeah. So sometimes there are groups that already exist that people can join. So like there's like a Kansas Authors Club, and there's different districts, and they run public workshops, right? A lot of times they exist at libraries. So if you're looking for something that already exists, there might be things that already exist to join. If you want to, but when I moved to the town I live in Kansas, I was like, where are they? They have to be here. Other people write everywhere. Where are they in this town? And so I realized I couldn't figure out where they were, so I just built the community that I wanted to be a part of. And for me, my hot tip is I keep the entry barrier low, like I don't make it hard to do it. People don't have homework, people don't have to read each other's work ahead of time. It's 8 p.m. on Mondays when it's not gonna interfere with most people's schedules. At my house, 2 hours. I buy snacks, drinks, a nice charcuterie tray. Come over, you're gonna get snacks, you're gonna get fed. You don't have to have new work, but we're gonna sit, we're gonna chat. We're gonna eat good cheese, and we're gonna have a conversation about work. and it's once a month, so I'm trying not to overburden people who might not be as on fire for the dictionary as me. But I also want to make the barrier of entry low, make it a positive social community space. And then also we set up the rules for the workshop, like what are we doing? And the way I run it, everybody gets to ask for the help they want. So it's not you are quiet and now we talk about this in your work. It's I just wrote this today and I'm looking for what is one line you would stake your life on and like I cannot cut. You would stand in front of it, in front of my bulldozing, eraser. And which one would you like, if it wasn't there, I could live without it. And what questions do you have? And so I can just say, that's what I want. And then people will say, love this line. This line was sort of for me. My question is like, why doesn't the snake come back in the poem? Whatever it is. But then I get the exact type of help I want to receive, but it also means that everybody who comes kind of needs to know what they want to ask for or just be like, I don't know, tell me whatever is fine. But then it makes sure that everyone coming has thought about what kind of help they do need for their work. Where do they know that it's at? What do they want to ask for? And then it's easier for people to come through and give you the help that you want because you were clear about the help that would be useful to you. Oh my gosh, we have 3 hands. Mark, do you want to pick a hand?
I think Gigi was first, 1, 2, and then 3.
Okay.
I was wondering if there's any specific authors that inspire your work or that helped you get started when you were first starting.
Wow, when I was first starting, one of my favorite books was Galway Kinnell's The Book of Nightmares. It's as cheerful as it sounds. But it's like dark and sort of like tarot meets new parenting, but also with murder. Like it's, dark and surreal and weird, and I really loved that one. I remember loving Tracy K. Smith's The Body's Question. I loved some of the old school stuff like Plath and Sexton. I loved Adrienne Rich and Louise Glick. So I had a lot of originals, and when I fell out of love with poetry for a while, what I did is I went back and I recreated my first few dates with poetry and went back to the things that first lit that fire in me to sort of restart coming back to those loves. So I definitely did not get rid of poems and books that I loved, but whenever I found, initially it was just poems rather than books, and I would put the poems up on my wall and sort of wallpaper my room with words and poems that I thought were great, so I could just easily return to what I thought was brilliant and beautiful. Now, I mentioned this in the meeting beforehand, I hand copy poems that I love in order to get to know them a little bit more intimately than just reading them or out loud or just reading them with my eyeballs. And I really love keeping anthologies of my favorite things that I've read. And so then when I travel, sometimes I just take one of those, and then I have 100 beloved poems with me no matter what. And then,
Have you experienced writer's block, and if so, how have you moved past it? Are there any techniques that you use to kind of get through it?
there are times when I don't feel like my best stuff is coming out, but I never feel blocked as in I can't write. So I can write badly, so that's part of what I think tricks me out of I'm not blocked. I'm blocked from writing well, but I'm not blocked from writing at all. So
How about I rephrase and say motivation?
I think that
You were starting to hint at it with the last question. Could you go a little bit further into that, how you got back into that love and kind of just the things you used, or was that it?
Yeah, so one of the things that is important to me is that I write a lot, not necessarily that I write poems a lot. So during COVID, I couldn't finish I could not write a complete sentence. I could not figure it out. So when we were all in lockdown and my brain was super fuzzy and every day kind of felt the same, I would just write 5 sentences. So each day it was something I smelled, heard, tasted, touched. And it was fragments, but it was just it didn't even have to be on the lines of the paper, but I just had to reflect on my day, connect with my senses, and remember things. And so for a while, that's all I did. So some days I am, when I was working on sound in my poems, I would just do 5 days of sound exercises. So I just do 10 lines of iambic pentameter, didn't have to make sense. I wasn't even trying to write sonnets. One day I would just do 10 lines of slant rhyme. One day I would just do, so I would just do these different exercises, because the point I make to my students too is if you want to keep your muscles in shape, right? You don't have to run your race time every time you jog, right? You don't have to perform a concert every time you pick up your instrument. Sometimes you're doing scales, right? So to just stay in touch with your own mind, just to stay in touch with your own skills, just doing little exercises, and 10 minutes a day, you know, writing down the senses, or doing, you know, lines that play with sound, or sometimes I just do a tarot card and ask it a question and I write 5 sentences. It doesn't have to be great writing. It just has to keep, you know, keep myself in touch with my creative side, because sometimes also, like, even for like the corny thing, like, so seasonally, we need winter in order to have a good spring, right? Like the soil needs a chance to rest. And sometimes it's just not happening for me. But that also, I also don't want to let it go entirely. I just want to have a lighter touch with my creative side, but I don't want to let go. So another thing I do is that hand copying poems that I love. If I can't write my own stuff, I at least write every day and pay attention to poems. Not every day, don't let me fool you in thinking it genuinely happens 24/7. But like, I try and stay pretty faithful to reflecting, reading, and writing. And that can look different every single time. Because in fact, figuring out a new relationship with it is part of what keeps it fresh for you. Is finding a new way to approach it, a new way to enjoy it. Because there's hardly anything in our life by doing it the exact same way. We don't eat the same meal every single day for our whole lives. So our writing practice doesn't have to be the same. But finding little games to play with yourself, ways to, a friend told me that play is our first profit. So what are ways that you can make it a joy rather than something you're dreading or afraid of, or makes you feel bad about yourself, or like it's not happening? What's the thing that would be fun for you? And make it playful and let it bring you joy and not frustration. Frustration is part of it. It's part of the package deal. But it can also just bring you a lot of like happiness and pleasure too, and ways that you can make it a pleasure. Earlier today too, and I can give you one if you want, we made these little homemade books that fit in our back pocket, because I was diagnosed with a rheumatological disorder that affects my joints. And so I often can't sit still and write for that long, and I have to keep moving in order to not lock up. And so like, how can I walk and write? And so like, I had to change my approach that way too, because I couldn't sit still for long periods of time. But just like exploring process and letting it be playful and fun, and it's allowed to change too. You might find something that works for now that next year won't let you in, but just finding new ways to play and letting it fill you up in that way. Who was the third hand? Okay.
So what would you say made you want to do poetry over like other forms of writing? Like, what was the advantages of poetry that draw you to that or something else, like just writing a book?
I really wanted to write novels when I was in college. And then I had a terrible fiction writer teacher and a really good poetry teacher. It really was that kind of started it. But I mean, I read more like novels as a kid than I read poems as a kid. I certainly wrote a lot of poems about my feelings in high school. But it was sort of like, I didn't even understand how much was possible in poetry until I had a good teacher, because it wasn't really taught, other than dead people, wasn't really taught in high school, and I didn't know how much was possible. But like, I got really on fire for like ways that a poem could tell a story. I got really on fire about language when I had a good teacher introduce me to everything it could do. I also think I identify as chaotic good, and I'm slowing down at middle age, but I really am like this about everything, and maybe move too quickly through my life or through decisions. But with poetry, one thing I quite liked was that I could go really fast, and I could make really fast, and I could go and keep moving. Whereas like a novel is a really long commitment. And so I really liked being able to make quickly and make the next thing and feel the next thing and experience the next thing. And so with my youth and temperament, poetry fit really well. And also just I had a really great teacher who just lit me up, and a fiction writing teacher that actually 2 back-to-back fiction writer teachers that made me feel like, I don't know if I want to do this. So one person made me excited about my possibility. One person was like, yeah, you don't have a lot of possibility here. Feeling excited to go back to keep working is part of what made me excited about poems.
So you mentioned that you wrote a lot about your feelings and
Mhm.
your poems were very, very deep. How do you get over the vulnerability of like having anybody can read like what's in your heart? Like anybody, even people you don't like, people that don't even know you, people that might judge you, people that might be like, oh my gosh, you're so cool, whatever. How do you get over that like vulnerability and like being that open?
I think also realizing that no matter how clear you think you're being, people will still misunderstand you. So it doesn't matter, like, and I realized, like, with my first book, and my family tried to read it, and like clearly did not even get the simplest poem. I was like, oh, I'm safe. So for me, it was just like, I can express myself. The few people who get this will get me, and the people who don't, that's fine. That I don't have to be gotten by everybody. I want to be seen badly. I think that's part of the human desire. I think that's why people go to therapy and confession and have besties. And I think we really want other people to see us. And so that's why I'm writing poems, but I'm also aware that not everybody gets poems in general. And even people who like poems might not get mine or like mine. But the people who do see me will see me so clearly and help. My first writers conference, someone came up to me and was like, who's your family member with mental illness? And I was like, whoa, what? Because they saw me, and it was too intense of a question to ask at a first meeting. But it was really clear that people who could see me could really see me this way. And so vulnerability is hard, but I also realized that I first wrote about my traumas and my bad childhood and the bad stuff, thinking that that was vulnerable. But the hardest thing for me to write was a love poem, which I find a lot more scary than the bad things that have happened to me. But that kind of openness is so much harder for me than this person in my life did this to me. That's actually a lot easier for me to say than, I like you, do you like me? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But like, do you like me this much? That's way harder for me because I'm not in control of that, and that's continually vulnerable, and that's just scary. But yeah, people won't get it no matter how clearly you state it, whether it's in a poem or not. And sometimes you get lucky and you see each other, and sometimes you have to keep talking and figuring it out, or writing the poem to figure it out. But yeah, it's so worth it if you find the people who are like, oh my God, I feel that way, right? Or like, and you find the people who get it, makes it worth it for me, because then there are people that like, just being seen is one of my favorite feelings. Yeah. Oh wait, is this our last one? Yeah. Okay. I'm not, yeah, okay.
You mentioned a lot of flowers by names, and they all have meanings. What was the process of trying to figure out like what flowers fit for each poem?
I definitely let myself, when I'm writing, I don't try and like, let me Google what flowers mean this. I feel like if you let your logic side of your brain, because there's a part, the editor brain is so useful, but it's a real jerk, right? Like it'd be like, how could you say that? That was so dumb, right? Like you can have this voice that like kills your flow, your creativity by like trying to correct you. And if your correction brain tries to operate at the same time as your creative brain, I feel like it just shuts it down. It's so useful in the right context, but while I'm writing, I'm not trying to fact check myself. I'm just like making stuff, and I'm just going, and I'm connecting, and I'm seeing what's happening. And then later on, I'll be like, marigolds. And then we get out the Googles, and then we were like, oh, but you know what? After like 6 different searches, I've discovered that the right flower is the hollyhock, right? Whatever it is, after I dig later. I also am just like, I really love to collect weird facts. I'm such a fan of like listicles that are like, you know, the coolest things to happen in science last year, or like 7 strange animal facts. Totally, I'll click on that every time. Because I like that stuff. And so sometimes I just have the fact because I've like collecting little facts. I'm this little magpie of weird world facts. But other times I just like let myself put in a bird, a flower, a thing, and later I'll be like, would that bird call happen at that time of day? And I'll just double check myself and like look into like what kind of, so I heard clouds weigh like 1 million pounds, and I was like, which cloud? A cirrus clearly isn't, is it cumulonim? And then I'll go back and check. But I can type like the cloud that weighs 1 million pounds or something, and then just keep going and making. And then you can be like, and you can like refine what you know by looking into it. But I feel like I can't create and edit at the same time. My brain will just, it'll shut me down. It'll just like press the shame button and be like, you're bad at this, quit now. So I've got to like stay in the making space, in the like time doesn't exist, I'm inside the spell making thing. And then later my editor brain can do its useful thing and be like, is that the right flower? Is that what you mean? Let's Google. So for me, that is what is helpful for me. My stuff doesn't have to be universal, but lots of people tell me they have a mean editor brain. There's like a real jerk up there telling you that that's a bad word or the wrong word, but that is my trick for avoiding that voice. Okay, all right.
I'm gonna give everybody time, if they want a free book, get it signed to have time to do that before the next class starts. So we're gonna just take a few seconds here. She'll sign at this table.
Okay.
We'll try to form a line, starting here and kind of wrap around the room so that we have some sort of